What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Persistent Purpose with MJ Hunter. I am your host, Coach MJ. I'm a global speaker, a mindset strategist, an emerging author, and an event producer, as well as a serial entrepreneur. And I'm so glad that you have either returned to this podcast if you are a current subscriber, or if you are new. I want to welcome you to the Persistent Podcast of Persistent Purpose family. And I want to encourage you to subscribe, turn on your alerts, your notifications, so that you will not miss an amazing episode coming your way. Today, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite topics as a communicator, a communications director, a communication project manager. Communication often appears in my roles that I play in my business, in my past jobs, because I am passionate about communicating. It is important to me that communication happens, that communication is effective, and that communication is multi-directional, so that a communication hasn't happened if you say something or communicate something, but the other person doesn't receive it. And so it's important to me that everybody here is heard and that everybody is understood, if at all possible. So today I want to talk about 11 practical steps that you can take to upskill. Now we're saying upskill, not upscale. Upskilling is upscaling your skills with communications, because we all know what it feels like or what the fallout can be when communication does not take place. There are conflicts, there are relationship breakdowns, there's disappointment, there's manipulation. There are so many bad things that can happen when communication is not clear. And so we want to make sure that we understand how we can be the most effective communicator, especially as you are pursuing your purpose, whether that's as an entrepreneur, whether that's in your professional career, in your personal life. You want to make sure that when you come to the plate, that you are making yourself understood and that you are seeking to understand others. And so I've actually already alluded to some of our 11 practical steps in the introduction, but we're going to go through these. We have a long list, but we're going to go through these pretty quickly. So the first step towards upskilling your communication skill is to be clear. Now, some of these are going to be like, well, duh. But I think that when we talk to others or when we are in writing, we are often not clear, even though we might think that we are, or we don't put any effort in making sure that we are clear. One of my favorite tips about being clear in your communication is to read or think about what you're about to say from the perspective of the other person, but not just the other person. Think about it from the perspective of a person that doesn't know anything about what's going on. A lot of times when we communicate, we're communicating as an insider, assuming that everybody read the previous part of the communication, or they have the insider knowledge, or they understand everything that you understand. The way to be clear in your communications is almost to go to the other extreme and assume that nobody read it before. Nobody understood. Nobody heard it. Nobody was clear before. So you have to make yourself clear in every communication. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go back and start from the drawing board, but there are ways that you can, with simple and concise language, which is taking us to number 2, kind of get everybody up to speed with where you are, or make sure that if somebody is just now joining the communication, that they will not be completely lost. So number 2, as I just said, is I forgot to put my words up on the screen. Be clear. Their bonus step is to make sure you put your banners up. So we just talked about being clear and making sure that what it is you're trying to communicate is what is actually communicated, by making sure that you look at it from other people's perspectives and from a beginner or outsider's perspective. The next one is to be concise. Concise means how many, or rather how few words can I use to communicate whatever it is I'm trying to communicate. There is a temptation when people are communicating with each other to be very wordy and very verbose, and there's a lot of redundancy, and they think if I say the same thing over and over with a louder voice sometimes, or more anger or more emotion behind it, that will get the point across. actually, the fewer words that you can use to communicate whatever it is that you need to communicate, the better. For one thing, it's going to make it a lot more sticky. What do we mean by sticky? It's going to stay with people. Think about if you're a person that goes to church or really to any event where somebody's speaking. When the person goes on and on and on and on, all you want to do is get out of there. And you usually lose your attention after about, I think 20 minutes is the average attention span. But a person that gives a concise speech and gets in and out of there very quickly, makes 3 points, backs them up, and they're gone, you actually can remember what they talked about. Remember that long, boring, wordy speech or sermon the next time you are communicating in writing or verbally, to make sure that you are not using extra words to try to make it drill the point home or to make yourself sound like you know more than you do, or whatever those reasons can be. It's not always from a bad place, but we want to make sure that we are concise. Now, number 3 is I want you to be curious. What I mean by curious, when you are communicating with another person and you want to know something from them, ask open-ended questions. Curiosity means that you are looking for more information than just the surface. And if you ask a yes or no question, most people are going to give you a yes or no answer. But yes and no does not invite deeper understanding, deeper connection, deeper discussion. And that's what you need in order to understand another human being. So I'm very intentional about not asking yes, no questions, unless yes or no is all that's needed. There are times when yes or no questions are absolutely appropriate. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the situations where you actually want to know more than just yes or no, but you don't put the thought into how can I word this question? So instead of saying, do you want to go to the Italian restaurant? And they just say yes or no, when actually what you want to know is which restaurant or which type of food they want. Ask them a question like, which do you want? Which restaurant? Which food? And that's a simple example, but in everything that we communicate, we can change most yes/no questions into something that invites someone to give a little bit more information. So let's avoid yes/no questions by being curious about what else there could be behind the answer. The next one, and I kind of alluded to it, I think under number 2, is to be controlled. Control your emotions. Managing your emotions leads to more effective communication. It can be, especially in high tense situations, it can be very tempting to fly off the handle or to raise your voice or to get angry. But all you're doing is setting the other person or the other people on the defensive. You are no longer communicating when you are being emotional. Now, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with emotions in and of themselves. We are emotional creatures. Women, men, everybody. We are emotional creatures. That's how we were created. But when you are trying to communicate as even-tempered and as even-keeled and as even-toned as you can be, the more likely it is to keep from, again, someone going off the rails. Now, some people are going to go off the rails no matter how even-tempered you are. Those are people you may or may not want to have to communicate with at all, or if you can't avoid them in your life, as little as possible. But we're talking about people that have some control over their emotions. You can be the leader in communication by choosing to stay even-keeled. Don't take things personally. Don't assume the worst. Assume the best in people. Sometimes when we are not controlled, when we let our emotions fly, it's because we are putting a meaning of behind what the person is doing or saying. We're taking it personally. We're deciding they're being a jerk. That's why they said that. It could be they just made an honest mistake. It could be that they genuinely believe they're doing the right thing, but it doesn't have to mean the negative portrayal that you're putting on top of it. Now, it could be that they mean harm, but what I'm doing is telling you how you can control your emotions by giving it a meaning inside your head. You can tell yourself they're not being a jerk, even if they maybe are, just to keep your emotions under control so that you can communicate clearly, so that that minimizes the chances for conflict, so that ultimately clear communication can take place and effective communication. The next one is to be constructive. So providing helpful, practical feedback to another person that can improve relationships. And have you ever noticed that when you have a good relationship with somebody, communication seems easier, but when you don't have a good relationship, sometimes communication can be more difficult. When you provide helpful feedback, helpful advice, again, in context, it has to be welcomed, it has to be meaningful, and those types of things. But when you provide helpful and practical feedback to a person, that can improve relationships because they can see that you have their best interest at heart. Instead of maybe being as more critical, be constructive where you're looking for the best in them, where you're looking for their best outcome. And that includes being mindful of their feelings as much as you can. Sometimes things may hurt someone's feelings, you can't avoid it, but do all you can to be helpful, to consider their feelings, to consider how you would want that communicated to you. A lot of this can be avoided by just putting ourselves in the other person's shoes if you've not noticed a pattern. But definitely giving a person feedback that is constructive, that lets them know you have their best interest at heart. That's going to improve relationships, which ultimately improves communication, because when we have a good relationship with a person, we automatically hear their feedback differently. Their communication overall differently. The next one is to be captivated. What do I mean by captivated? Not captivating, but captivated. That means I want you to practice active listening and get caught up in what the other person is saying. When you are fully focused on the speaker, that's going to improve your conversations. You're not sitting there waiting for your turn like you're, with the jump rope, you're waiting to jump into the double dutch. No. You're not waiting on your turn. You are listening to them fully, almost with no clue of what you're going to say in response. Because if you're formulating a response while they're talking, you're not listening to them, and you're assuming you know what they're going to say. It could be that, they start out sentence 1, 2, and 3. You think you know what they're going to, you've heard what they're going to say and you know how you would respond. But what about if in sentence 5 and 6, they completely turn a corner and the response you were going to give to sentences 1, 2, and 3 is no longer valid? If you're not listening, you won't know that. And people can tell when you're not listening. They can tell when your mind is somewhere else. And it doesn't even have to be that you're physically scrolling on your phone or looking away. There is an engagement that happens. There's eye contact. There's a physical, sometimes a slight leaning forward. There are, verbal sounds and cues that you can give to let someone know that you're listening. And when you do respond, they will know when your response is appropriate based on what they said. Be captivated by what the other person is saying. Put them first. It's not a race to see who can get their words out. That's where conflict comes from. That's where misunderstanding and manipulation come from in communication. Listen to them, hear them out. What's the worst that can happen? You end up having to go back to your original response that you probably would have said at first. Okay. So then you say that response, but you never know fully the right response until you've completely heard the other person out. Don't cut them off. Fight the urge. And we're all guilty of that. I'm guilty of that. Even as a great communicator, I am guilty sometimes of cutting people off. Sometimes it's excitement. You think that you know what they're going to say. And then they're like, well, that's not what I was going to say. Let's save some time. Let's save some frustration. Just let them finish and then have your say. Be captivated by what the other person is saying. I've lost count, so I don't know where we are, but we're getting close. Be commanding. Practice assertiveness. All of these are traits that you need to be in order to upskill your communications, right? I want you to be commanding by practicing assertiveness. Expressing your needs and opinions respectfully will enhance your communications. I said respectfully. Being assertive is not the same as being aggressive. Being assertive means you speak up for yourself, you establish boundaries, you say what you need, you say what you think, and you're not doing it from a fearful place of wondering, what if they don't like it? What if they don't accept it? Sometimes people aren't going to like it. Sometimes they're not going to accept it. That has to be okay. Assert yourself. So here's where you're putting yourself first, not necessarily first in line in the conversation, but certainly putting your needs first in front of what you are as you're expressing your side of the conversation. Again, when you also consider the other person's point of view, there's going to be a beautiful marrying of the two perspectives, your own and theirs. That's how you come to a great space of collaboration, of understanding, when you consider them and some of the steps we've already talked about, but also asserting your own needs and opinions and not being so fearful or people pleasing that you let yourself go by the wayside. That's going to make for clear communications, because nobody wants to come back weeks later, months later, and somebody said, well, that's not what I thought, but you didn't say anything. Well, I didn't want to make you mad or whatever. That's frustrating. You had an opportunity to assert yourself, communicate clearly, and you didn't. And now here we are. More time has gone by, more misunderstanding, and now we're finally getting to the truth. So go ahead and be commanding by asserting yourself in the conversation. That's not the same as aggression. Now, it might be perceived by certain people who don't have an emotional intelligence or a level of emotional stability or maturity. They may perceive your assertiveness as aggression, and that's okay. Their perceptions of your best efforts and intentions is not your problem when you've done your best. Next step to upskilling your communications is to be cognizant. Cognizant of what? Which means knowledgeable or aware of nonverbal cues. I think some studies show that nonverbal is communicating more than the words coming out of your mouth or the words in writing. Now, nonverbal is going to matter more when you are talking to a person, because when you're in writing, they can't see you anyway. So we're talking about visible but nonverbal clues. That's your body language. That's your tone. When you are cognizant of their nonverbal cues, that's going to help you understand them. So if they're looking off, if they're shuffling, if they're slumped over, if they're huffing and puffing, and we kind of know this instinctively when a person is communicating their displeasure or a lack of engagement, they're not looking at you, they're on their phone, there's nonverbal cues, but there can be subtle ones that are easy to miss. Maybe they're not on their phone, maybe they're sitting there looking at you, but you can tell when a person's looking at you in anger versus looking at you trying to understand you versus looking at you confused. Be mindful. Again, you're watching the other person as you are sharing your point of view. Make sure they're getting it, because it's a two-way street with communication. If they're not picking up what you're putting down, you're wasting your breath. So be cognizant of those nonverbal cues that can let you know whether your message is being adequately received or not. The next one is actually one of my favorites, and it is to be compelling. Enhance your vocabulary. Expand your vocabulary. That's going to improve your communication. Now, remember at the beginning, we were talking about being concise. So we're not talking about being super wordy or trying to use big words just to sound impressive. But if you are always using the same low level words that don't have much meaning, like good or great or even awesome, or here's one of mine that I'm actually working on, the word things. We use the word things to represent a lot of things in communication when we're in conversation, and it can actually be a very lazy way to communicate. Most of the time, if you took time to think, you could actually describe what the thing is. So instead of saying all these things we're going through, all these situations, all these circumstances, I put up the things that were up front. I put up the clothes. I put up the dishes. Like whatever the thing is, that happens to be one of mine I'm working on. Probably if you've been listening to these episodes, you heard me say things a lot, probably in this episode. Saying good. How are things going? It's good. Good almost means nothing anymore. It is a very bland word that has so little meaning left. Say what it is. Is it fabulous? Is it magnificent? Is it engaging? Is it interesting? What is it? Find some better words. And one way to enhance your vocabulary is to read more. Read books. Read success books. Read biographies. Read history books. Whatever you want to read. You might even learn something from some novels and things of that nature. I just said things. Did you catch that? Things of that nature. But make sure that you are enhancing your vocabulary. Give yourself a new word every day that you start using. Again, it doesn't have to be a 15-letter word. It could be an 8-letter word, but it's one that you're not using right now. Put that word in your vocabulary and upskill your communications by using more colorful words, more accurate words, more appropriate words in your communication. The next one is to be compassionate. And we already alluded to this one. This is being compassionate means developing empathy and understanding others' feelings. We've already talked about this one, so we don't have to say a lot. If you are thinking about the communication from the other person's point of view and how it might be making them feel, whether they can understand it or not, whether they're going to possibly have a reaction to what you're saying, when you're considering their feelings, it's going to shape your communication. So maybe you won't, if we're talking about in writing, we got keyboard warriors on the internet that are typing things. There it is again, things. They're typing words that they would never say to the person's face. Even though it's a stranger, they would never say that to a person's face. But they are not considering the feelings of the person on the other side of that keyboard, on the other side of that screen. So they're saying all these vile words and phrases to them, possibly to hurt their feelings, and that's the response they want. But I know that that's not the type of person you are. You're here trying to upskill your communication, so you're probably not a vicious person. So just be compassionate, consider the other person's point of view, even as you are asserting yourself. So if you have noticed, as we've gone through this list, there are aspects of upskilling your communication that can seem almost counter to each other. That's where balance comes in. A little bit of this and a little bit of that. You can't always win on all of these steps that we're talking about in this particular communication, this episode, but making the effort to move in that direction with all of these steps is going to make your communications better, even when some communications are skewed more in one direction than another. We have one left, and then I have a bonus one. Okay. This last one in the list, this should be number 11, is to be confident. Now, remember, we talked about being cognizant of other people's nonverbal cues, their body language, their tone. This one, we're saying we want you to use positive body language. Utilizing your posture and your gestures, that's going to affect how you are received and how you receive others. Because again, if they're on their side of the communication and they're being cognizant of what you are portraying, that's going to affect how the communication comes from them. But being confident, standing up tall, gesturing in appropriate ways, eye contact, your tone, all of these exude a confidence that you feel like the communication is going to go well, the conversation. And again, we're not even talking about always conflict-related communication. This can just be your everyday practices, exuding confidence, smiling, moving slowly, not dragging like something's wrong, but just not moving with a lot of haste and scattered, but carrying yourself with confidence is a form of communication because it speaks for you before you walk in the door. The majority of communication happens before a word is exchanged. Make sure that you are communicating confidence every time you begin an interaction with another human being. And then I am adding a last and final bonus. So this should be number 12, practical steps to upskilling your communications. And that is to be a change maker. So what do I mean by a change maker? I want you to start practicing public speaking. Yes, public speaking. You will gain confidence. We just talked about being confident by communicating in public. The work and the effort that you will put into preparing to speak publicly will make you step it up a notch. You're going to be more cognizant of your words. You're going to choose your words more wisely. You probably will practice more. You'll be in the mirror. You're going to take care of those nonverbal cues you could be giving off, your appearance, all of the aspects that feed into communicating concisely and clearly and just effectively overall. When you are speaking in public, you make extra effort because you don't want to look bad. You want to look good. There's another one of those weak words. You want to be fabulous when you are a public speaker. So, for example, and public speaking, I'm not even always talking about a stage in front of people in a room. Right now, I'm doing public speaking. I'm streaming this podcast episode to my channel. People could be potentially watching live. They're definitely going to be watching afterwards. And I want to make sure I communicate this topic clearly. What did I do? I prepared my notes. I have a long sheet of notes so that I'm not trying to come off the top of my head and try to remember and stammering over my words. I communicated effectively because I prepared in advance. And one great way to make sure you prepare communication in advance is to speak it in front of other people versus an email versus a private conversation. Not to say that you can't prepare for those as well, but when you speak in front of people, you definitely are going to put in that effort. So that is our list of now 12 practical steps to upskill your communication. And if you would like to know more, get involved with some of the resources and events and training opportunities that I have available in my little universe, I invite you to go to MelanieHunter.com. That's MELLANIE Hunter.com, and click there to follow me on multiple platforms. Sometimes I have upcoming trainings that are available and other resources, free downloads. Go to that website. Everything is there for you, and get involved. Make sure you like, comment below this video, and share this episode with somebody else who will want to upskill their communication. That's going to do it for me. Until next time, this has been Persistent Purpose with MJ Hunter. Take care and be blessed.